Hello, Night Seekers, and welcome to Lacuna Noir. This is where forgotten stories and gentle voices meet, carrying you softly into peaceful sleep, wrapped in mystery. Before tonight's stories begin, I'd love to know, where in the world are you listening from? Drop a comment below and let me know. And a little note before we begin. You may notice a few brief ads in the first 10 minutes, but after that, the rest of the video is completely ad-free. Just you, the silence, and the stories. So settle in, get comfortable, and let the night carry you. If you're drawn to these quiet, shadowed nights, don't forget to like, subscribe, and tap the bell so you never miss a story when darkness calls. The first time we had to have that conversation was after the fifth time she called 911. It was the middle of the night, and I had been lying in bed for what felt like hours. I had midterms coming up, and I was already stressed out, exhausted, and angry at myself for not studying enough. I was at that point where you are too tired to focus, but too anxious to sleep. I remember lying there staring at the ceiling, thinking that sleep or death would both be equally useful at that moment, as long as one of them came quickly. Then I heard her in the living room. At first, I thought she was watching something on TV. There was a low sound coming through the wall, but it was hard to tell what it was. Then I heard crying. Not quiet crying either. It sounded like someone was completely falling apart. I sat up in bed and listened for a second. My other roommate's room was on the other side of the apartment, and she was usually asleep early. The roommate in the living room had been acting strangely for a while, but I still did not understand what was happening at that point. I knew she had been staying awake for long periods of time. I knew she had been skipping classes. I knew she had been spending long nights walking around the apartment, making coffee at strange hours, and talking about things that did not make much sense. But I did not know how bad it had become. I got out of bed and walked into the hallway. The apartment was dark except for the living room. A lamp was on near the couch, and the television was off. The light from the lamp made the room look yellow and dull, like everything was covered in dust. My roommate was sitting on the couch with her knees pulled up toward her chest. She had her phone in one hand, and she was crying so hard that her whole body was shaking. At first, I thought something had happened to someone in her family. I asked her what was wrong. She looked up at me with this wild, terrified expression. Her face was wet with tears, and her hair was messy, like she had been running her hands through it for hours. She was breathing too fast. She looked at me like she was relieved I had finally come out of my room. Then she started wailing about the building across the street. She kept saying the bank was on fire. Our apartment faced a small street, and directly across from us was a bank building. It was not a huge bank, just a normal brick building, with offices and a parking lot. At night, it was usually dark, except for a few lights near the entrance and the sign out front. I had looked at that building hundreds of times. It was just part of the view from the living room window. But according to her, it was burning. She said flames were coming out of the windows. She said people were trapped inside. She said people were dying and nobody was doing anything. She said she had called 911, but they did not care. She kept repeating that the dispatcher did not believe her, and that she could hear people screaming over there. Her voice kept getting louder. She was crying, shouting, and pointing toward the window like the fire was obvious. I turned around and looked outside. The bank was not on fire. It was completely dark and completely normal. There were no flames, no smoke, no emergency lights, no fire trucks, no people running around. The parking lot was empty. The street was quiet. The building looked exactly the way it always looked after midnight. I stood there for a long time, staring at it. At first, I thought maybe I was missing something. Maybe there was a fire on the other side of the building. Maybe something was happening that I could not see from where I was standing. But there was nothing. No orange glow in the windows. No smoke rising above the roof. No flashing lights in the distance. Just a bank. A completely ordinary, silent bank. Behind me, she kept crying. I turned back to her and asked when she had last slept. She did not answer at first. She was still staring at the window. I asked again. Finally, she said she had been awake for 2 days. I remember feeling my entire mood change at that moment. I was annoyed before I came out of my room. I was tired, stressed about school, and frustrated that I had been woken up. But when she said she had been awake for 2 days, I stopped feeling annoyed. I started feeling scared. I told her the building was not on fire. She said it was. I told her I was looking directly at it. She said I could not see it because I was standing in the wrong place. I moved closer to the window. I looked from one side to the other. I looked through the blinds. I looked at the roof line, the doors, the empty parking lot, and every window I could see. Nothing, I told her as calmly as I could, that she needed to go to bed. She started crying harder. She said she could not sleep because people were dying. She said she could smell smoke. She said she could hear alarms. She kept looking at her phone like she expected 911 to call back and tell her the fire department was on the way. I told her that if there really was a fire, somebody else would see it too. I said that before she called emergency services again, she needed to wake one of us up and have someone else verify it. At the time, I was trying to be practical. I was trying to make sure she did not keep calling 911 over something that was not happening. I did not want her to get in trouble. I did not want emergency services being sent to false calls. I also did not know what else to say. She looked at me for a long time. Then she finally nodded. She went to her room eventually, but I did not sleep much after that. I kept thinking about the look on her face. She was not pretending. That was the part that stayed with me. It was not like she was trying to get attention or make a joke. She looked completely convinced that the building across the street was burning down. She looked like she truly believed people were trapped inside and dying while nobody cared. She looked terrified. The next morning, I mentioned it to my other roommate. She had heard some of the crying, but had not gotten out of bed. When I told her what happened, she looked worried, but not surprised. She said our roommate had been acting strange for days. She had noticed that she was barely sleeping and barely eating. She had been leaving the apartment at odd times, then coming back looking exhausted and wired at the same time. We both agreed that she needed rest. We also agreed that she should not be left alone in the apartment if she was going to keep seeing things that were not there. But it did not stop. A few nights later, she was awake again. I remember being in the kitchen late at night, trying to make something quick to eat before going back to studying. She came out of her room looking pale and shaky. She stood in the doorway for a few seconds without saying anything. Then she asked if I smelled smoke. I did not. She asked again, louder. I told her no. She walked straight to the living room window and started looking outside. At first, she was quiet. Then she suddenly stepped back, covering her mouth with both hands. "The building is on fire again," she said. I went to the window. Nothing was burning. This time, she did not call 911 right away. She asked me to look. She pointed across the street and said the flames were behind the bank, spreading from the back. She said the whole roof was glowing. I looked exactly where she pointed. There was nothing. The bank was dark. The street was empty. The night was quiet. I told her I could not see it. She looked at me like I was lying. That was the beginning of the pattern. She would stay awake. for strange amounts of time. Sometimes she would say she had not slept in 24 hours. Sometimes she would say she had only slept for a few minutes. Sometimes she would claim she had been awake for 3 days, but we were never completely sure because her sense of time became unreliable. She stopped going to class. At first, I thought she was just skipping because she was stressed or overwhelmed. College can do that to people. Midterms, money problems, homesickness, bad grades, lack of sleep. It can make you disappear into your room and avoid everything. But she was not resting in her room. She was awake constantly. She would sit in the living room staring out the window. She would pace through the apartment. She would make coffee at 4 in the morning. She would microwave food and forget about it. She would start conversations that did not make sense. Then suddenly stop talking and stare at something behind you. And every so often, she would announce that something was on fire. Sometimes it was the bank building across the street. Sometimes it was another building farther down the road. Once, she insisted there was a fire in the dumpster area behind our apartment complex. She stood at the back window saying she could see flames climbing up the fence. My other roommate and I looked. There was nothing there. Another time, she said she could see smoke coming from the apartment below us. She grabbed her phone and started dialing 911. I took the phone from her before she could make the call. I felt horrible doing it. I did not want to treat her like a child. I did not want to act like she was incapable of making her own decisions. But she had already called emergency services multiple times. She was calling about fires that none of us could see. She was panicking, crying, and insisting people were dying. At some point, we had to step in. After a few more incidents, my other roommate and I stopped letting her cook in the apartment. That sounds cruel when I say it now, but we were scared. She had started leaving burners on. She would put something in the microwave and walk away. Once, she tried to make food on the stove in the middle of the night and then went into her room while the pan was still heating. We did not know whether she was going to accidentally start a real fire while she was convinced imaginary ones were happening outside. So we made a rule that she could not cook alone. We told her we would help if she needed food. We told her she could ask one of us to use the stove or oven. We tried to explain that it was not meant to punish her. We were just worried. She did not take it well. She accused us of treating her like she was crazy. Neither of us knew what to say to that. We did not want to call her crazy. We were not doctors. We did not know what was happening inside her head. We only knew she had barely slept. She was seeing fires that were not there, and she was repeatedly calling emergency services because she thought people were dying. The apartment slowly became unbearable. Every time the phone rang late at night, I would tense up. Every time I heard her footsteps in the hallway, I would wonder if she had seen another fire. Every time she stood by the window, I would look outside automatically. The bank became the worst part of it. It was just there all the time, directly across from us. A dark brick building with a small sign out front. Normal during the day. Normal at night. But after enough of her episodes, I started feeling strange whenever I looked at it. There were nights when I would wake up and see the bank through the living room window, and for a split second, I would expect it to be burning. I would imagine orange light behind the windows. I would imagine flames moving across the roof. I would imagine the sound of sirens. Then I would look again and see nothing. The building was never on fire. Not once. At least, not that I ever saw. We tried talking to her about getting help. We suggested she call her parents. We suggested she talk to someone at school. We told her that staying awake for days was dangerous. We told her that she needed to sleep, eat, and get out of the apartment for a while. Sometimes she agreed. Sometimes she would say she knew something was wrong. Other times, she would become defensive and say we were making everything worse. She would say we were ignoring what was right in front of us. She would say the fires were real and that we were the ones refusing to see them. That was the hardest part. She was still our roommate. She was still someone we knew. During the day, when she had gotten some sleep, she could seem almost normal. She could joke around. She could talk about classes. She could sit with us and watch something on TV. Then night would come, and she would start staring at the windows again. It felt like we were living with two different versions of the same person. Eventually, she moved out. I do not remember every detail about how it happened. I think her parents came to help her pack. I think school and family pressure had finally caught up with her. By then, the apartment felt less like a home and more like a place where everyone was waiting for the next emergency. When she left, I felt guilty for being relieved. But I was relieved. The apartment became quiet again. I could study without listening for her crying in the living room. I could sleep without wondering if she would call 911. I could look at the bank across the street and see it for what it was, just a dark, boring office building. Still, I kept thinking about her. After she moved out, I asked her parents about the fire thing. I did not know how to bring it up. I did not want to embarrass her or make her look bad. But I also needed to know whether this had happened before. I wanted to know if there was something her family had seen that could explain it. I asked if she had ever stayed awake for long periods of time. They said they did not know. I asked if she had ever called emergency services because she thought a building was on fire. They looked confused. I explained that she had called 911 several times while living with us. I explained that she would look out the window and insist the bank was burning. I said she sounded completely convinced that people were trapped or dying. Her parents said they had never heard of that. They said they had never seen her do anything like it before. They were just as confused as we were. That was the part that bothered me most. If her parents had said, yes, she has done this before, then maybe it would have made sense. Maybe there would have been a pattern. Maybe there would have been a history we did not know about. But they were stunned. They had no explanation. They did not know why she had started staying awake for days. They did not know why she kept seeing fires. They did not know why it seemed to happen almost every time she looked toward that bank building. I never found out what happened to her after that. I hope she got help. I hope she eventually slept. I hope she was able to return to school, get stable, and have people around her who understood what she was going through better than we did. But I still think about those nights sometimes. I think about how real the fires seemed to her. I think about the way she cried like people were dying right across the street. I think about standing in the living room and staring at that dark building for several minutes, trying to make sure I was not missing something. And I think about the strange feeling that slowly grew inside me after months of it. Because even though I never saw flames, I started to dread looking out that window. Not because I thought the bank was haunted. Not because I thought there was really some supernatural fire that only she could see. But because I had watched someone become completely terrified by something that did not exist for anyone else. And once you have seen that enough times, it changes the way you look at the dark. Especially when the person beside you is crying, pointing at an ordinary building, and begging you to believe that it is burning. When I was 5 years old, I spent a weekend at my godfather's cabin in the woods. I do not remember every detail about that trip, because I was very young, but I remember enough that the memory has stayed with me for years. There are a few moments from childhood that feel blurry and far away, almost like old photographs. This is not one of them. This is one of the clearest memories I have from that age. My godfather's cabin was deep in the woods, far enough from town that there were no nearby streetlights, no traffic sounds, and no houses close enough to see through the trees. During the day, it was actually a nice place. There were tall trees everywhere, a long dirt driveway, and a small clearing around the cabin. The air smelled like wet leaves, wood, and the smoke from the fireplace. I remember being excited to stay there because it felt like an adventure. The cabin itself was old but comfortable. It had wood-paneled walls, a kitchen downstairs, a living room with a fireplace, and bedrooms upstairs. The stairs were narrow and creaked whenever someone walked on them. I remember that clearly because the sound of those stairs became important later. My mom was there with me, and my godfather was supposed to be taking care of us. He was a kind man, at least from what I remember. He had a certain way of laughing that made everyone else laugh, too, even when he was not saying anything funny. He wore comfortable clothes around the cabin, usually old shirts, loose pants, and slippers. He also had a cat that lived with him. The cat was small and nervous, the kind that would sit near people, but did not always want to be picked up. The first evening at the cabin was normal. We ate dinner together. I remember sitting at the table while the adults talked. I remember the fire making the living room warm. I remember being tired from the drive and from running around outside earlier in the day. At some point, my mom took me upstairs and put me to bed. The bedroom I slept in was small. It had an old bed, a nightstand, and one window looking out into the trees. The curtains were thin, and even after they were closed, I could still see a little bit of darkness around the edges. I was used to sleeping with my bedroom door shut. I always had been. I did not like leaving it open at night. Even when I was little, an open bedroom door made me feel exposed somehow, like the dark hallway could look into the room. So when I went to bed that night, the door was shut. I remember my mom saying goodnight. I remember hearing her footsteps moving away down the hallway. Then I remember the quiet of the cabin settling around me. At night, the woods were completely different. During the day, the trees had looked peaceful. At night, they became a black wall outside the windows. The cabin made noises that I was not used to hearing at home. The wood creaked. The wind moved through the branches. Sometimes the roof made soft popping sounds as the temperature changed. I was not terrified of it, but I noticed it. Eventually, I fell asleep. Then I woke up very early. It was still dark enough that the room barely had any light in it, but the sky outside was beginning to change. It was around 5 in the morning, maybe a little earlier or later. The sun had not risen properly yet. There was only that thin gray-blue light that comes right before morning, when the world looks colorless and quiet. At first, I did not know why I was awake. I lay there for a few seconds, staring toward the ceiling. I remember feeling confused because the cabin was so silent. There was no sound of people talking downstairs, no television, no movement, no cars passing outside, just the low hum of silence and the faint sound of wind against the trees. Then I realized I wanted to find my mom. I was 5 years old. Waking up somewhere unfamiliar before everyone else can feel strange, even when you are not scared. I probably expected to go downstairs and find my godfather making coffee or my mom sitting at the table. Maybe I thought breakfast was about to start. Maybe I just wanted to be near someone familiar. I got out of bed. The floor was cold beneath my feet. I remember standing there for a moment, looking at the closed bedroom door. I did not want to open it because the hallway beyond it was dark, but I told myself I was just going downstairs. I reached for the handle and opened the door. The hallway was dim and quiet. There was a small amount of light coming from downstairs. Not from a lamp or anything obvious, but from the early morning sky coming through the windows. It was enough for me to see the shape of the stairway at the end of the hall. I walked toward it slowly. The stairs led down into the living room. From the top, you could see part of the room below. You could see the fireplace, one side of the couch, and the rocking chair that sat near the bottom of the stairs. That rocking chair was my godfather's favorite place to sit. He would sit there in the evening, sometimes holding a mug, sometimes petting his cat, sometimes just rocking gently while listening to the fire crackle. I remembered seeing him in that chair the night before. It was an old wooden rocking chair, dark brown and heavy-looking, with worn arms and a soft blanket thrown over one side. As I started down the stairs, I looked toward the chair. At first, I thought my godfather was sitting in it. There was someone there wearing his clothes. I could see the shape of a person in the chair. The early light was weak, but I could make out a shirt and pants that looked like the clothes my godfather had worn the night before. I remember feeling relieved for maybe half a second because I thought he was awake. Then I saw the face. It was not my godfather. The thing sitting in the rocking chair looked like someone had tried to make a copy of him and failed badly. It was small for an adult, maybe around 5 feet tall, but its body did not look right. It had a hunched posture, thin shoulders, and limbs that looked too narrow beneath the clothes. Its skin looked wrinkled and pale, almost gray in the early morning light. Its nose was long and sharp, much longer than a normal person's nose, and its face looked wrong in a way I could not explain properly at the time. The first thing I really noticed was its smile. It had a huge smile stretched across its face. Not a normal smile, not even an exaggerated smile. Its mouth was far too wide enough that it seemed to take up more than half of its face. The corners of its mouth looked pulled back too far. Inside that smile were teeth that looked thin and pointed, like sharp little needles. It was smiling at me. Then I noticed the cat. My godfather's cat was in its arms. The cat was not resting there peacefully. She was struggling. Her body was tense, and she was twisting like she wanted to get away. I could hear a faint, frightened sound coming from her. Not a full meow, more like a desperate little cry. The creature held her against its chest with one arm. With the other hand, it was petting her. But it was not really petting her. Its fingers were long and thin, and the nails looked like claws. They were sharp, dark, and curved. The hand moved slowly over the cat's back, dragging the claws through her fur. I remember seeing the cat flinch and struggle harder each time the hand moved. The thing did not look down at the cat. It looked at me. It just sat there in my godfather's rocking chair, wearing my godfather's clothes, holding his cat, and staring directly at me with that enormous smile. I froze on the stairs. I do not know how long I stood there. It may have only been a second or two, but it felt much longer. My whole body went cold. I could not move. I could not speak. I remember gripping the railing because I suddenly felt like I might fall. The creature kept rocking, very slowly, back and forth. The wooden chair made a soft creaking sound each time it moved. Creak, 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 the cat struggled again, but the thing held her tighter. Its smile never changed. I remember thinking, in the simple way a child thinks, that it was pretending to be my godfather. It had his clothes. It sat in his chair. It held his cat. But it was not him. It looked like something pretending to be a person without understanding what a person was supposed to look like. That thought made the fear hit me all at once. I finally turned and ran. I do not remember going back up every stair. I only remember suddenly being in the upstairs hallway, then inside the bedroom. I slammed the door behind me as hard as I could. I remember the loud sound it made when it hit the frame. Then I ran to the bed, climbed under the covers, and pulled the blanket over my head. I was shaking so hard that the bed moved. I tried to stay quiet. I pressed my hands over my mouth because I was afraid the thing would hear me crying. I could hear my own breathing inside the blanket. I could smell the sheets and feel the warmth trapped under them, but none of that made me feel safe. I waited for my mom to come upstairs. She did not. I waited for my godfather to call out. He did not. The cabin was silent for a few seconds. Then I heard the stairs. Creak, 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 someone was coming up. The sound was slow and steady. I knew those stairs made noise when people used them. I had heard my mom and godfather walking on them before. But this sounded different. It was slower, heavier in some places, and lighter in others. Like whatever was climbing them did not move the way a person normally moved. I held my breath. The footsteps reached the top of the stairs. Then I heard the hallway floor creak. The sound stopped outside my bedroom door. I remember waiting for the handle to turn. For a moment, nothing happened. Then I heard the door open. I was under the blanket, but I knew it had opened. I could tell from the sound of the latch and the change in the air. The room felt colder. There was a faint creak of the door moving inward. I squeezed my eyes shut. I did not want to look. I did not want to see its face again. I did not want to see that smile. Then I heard something move into the room. Not quickly, not violently, just slowly. A soft shift of weight on the wooden floor. One step, then another, then nothing. It stood beside the bed. I knew it was there. I could not see it because I had the blanket over my head, but I could feel that someone was standing close to me. You know that feeling when someone is near you even before they touch you? That was what it felt like. The air around the bed seemed heavier. I could feel a coldness along the side of my face, where the blanket had slipped slightly. I stayed perfectly still. I tried not to breathe too loudly. I remember thinking that if I did not move, maybe it would think I was asleep. Maybe it would leave me alone. Maybe it only wanted the cat. Maybe it would go downstairs and disappear. But it did not leave right away. It just stood there. I have no idea how long it was in the room. In reality, it may have been a few minutes. But to a terrified 5-year-old hiding under a blanket, it felt like hours. Every second stretched out. My legs began to hurt because I was curled up so tightly. My hands were damp with sweat. I wanted to scream for my mom, but I was too afraid of what would happen if I made a sound. At one point, I thought I heard breathing. It was very faint, not loud enough to be certain. But I remember a slow, dry sound from somewhere beside the bed. It did not sound like my mom. It did not sound like my godfather. It sounded too close and too quiet. I kept my eyes closed. I kept the blanket over my head. Eventually, I heard movement again. A step away from the bed. Then another. The floor creaked as whatever it was walked toward the door. I heard the door move. Then I heard the slow footsteps in the hallway. Then the stairs. Creak, 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 the sound went down toward the living room. After that, I stayed under the covers. I did not get out of bed. I did not call for anyone. I do not know how long I stayed like that. I may have fallen asleep again from exhaustion, or maybe I just stayed frozen until morning came properly. I only know that sometime later, I heard a familiar voice outside the bedroom. It was my godfather. He called my name and said it was time to wake up for breakfast. For a second, I was too scared to answer. Then he opened the door. I looked out from under the blanket. It was really him. He looked normal. He was wearing different clothes than the ones the creature had been wearing downstairs. He looked tired, but calm, like someone who had just gotten up early to start breakfast. He smiled at me normally and asked if I was okay. I remember staring at him for a long moment. Then I asked him where his cat was. He looked confused and said she was downstairs. I asked if she was okay. He said yes. I did not explain right away. I was still too scared and too young to make sense of what I had seen. But eventually I told my mom and godfather that something had been sitting in the rocking chair. I told them it had been wearing his clothes. I told them it had his cat and sharp claws. I told them it had come upstairs and stood beside my bed. They did not believe me. They said I must have had a nightmare. They said I had probably woken up scared and imagined the rest. They told me that cabins can make strange noises at night and that the woods can make a child feel nervous. My mom tried to reassure me. My godfather probably thought I had been dreaming, but there was one detail that bothered me even then. When my godfather came upstairs to wake me up, my bedroom door was open. I had slammed that door shut. I remembered doing it clearly. I remembered the sound it made. I remembered pulling the blanket over my head afterward because I thought the closed door would keep the creature out. But the door was open, and I never slept with my bedroom door open. Even at 5 years old, that was something I was sure about. I always wanted it shut. I would ask for it to be shut before I fell asleep. If it was open, I would notice. So when I saw that open door, I felt the fear come back all over again. Maybe I had dreamed everything. Maybe I had dreamed slamming the door. Maybe I had dreamed the thing in the chair, the cat struggling, the footsteps on the stairs, and the cold feeling beside my bed. But if it was only a dream, why was the door open? I still do not know. No one else believes it happened. They all think it was a childhood nightmare, made worse by an unfamiliar cabin, a dark stairway, and an active imagination. Maybe they are right. Maybe my mind turned ordinary sounds into something terrifying. But I remember the creature too clearly. I remember the wrinkled skin. I remember its long nose. I remember the huge smile full of sharp teeth. I remember my godfather's clothes hanging strangely on its body. I remember the cat fighting to get away. And I remember standing at the top of those stairs while it slowly rocked in the chair and stared at me. Most of all, I remember the feeling of lying under the covers while something stood beside my bed. That is not a feeling I have ever been able to forget. This is probably the scariest and creepiest thing I have ever seen. Since I had two friends with me who saw the exact same thing, I know I was not alone, and I know I did not just imagine it. That helps a little. At least I have people who believe me because they were there. But even now, years later, it is still one of the strongest memories I have from my first year of middle school. It was one of those memories that never faded properly. I can forget what I ate yesterday. I can forget names, dates, and small things that happened only a few years ago. But I still remember the field, the flagpole, the empty school grounds, and the moment I looked up and saw that man sitting where no person should have been able to sit. At the time, I was still new to middle school. Everything felt bigger than it really was. The buildings were larger than my old school, the hallways were longer, and there were more students everywhere. I remember feeling small during my first year there. I knew some people, but not many. I was still getting used to the teachers, the routines, the subjects, and the way older students seemed to know exactly where they were going, while the rest of us just followed the crowd. Our school had several different buildings spread around one large campus. There was the main building, the classrooms, the gym area, and another building used for home economics and practical classes. Behind that building was an open area where students would hang around after school if they were waiting for friends, parents, or older siblings. There was also a large all-purpose field between the buildings and the main school gate. It was a wide, open field used for sports, assemblies, school events, and anything else that needed a lot of space. In the middle of that field stood a huge flagpole. It was taller than anything around it. During school hours, it looked normal. Students walked past it without paying attention. Teachers stood near it during assemblies. The flag would move in the wind, and nobody thought much about it. But after school, when the field was empty and the sky started getting darker, the flagpole always looked different. That afternoon, school had already ended. It was probably past 5 in the evening. Most students had gone home, and the campus was quieter than usual. There were still a few people around, but not many. Some students were waiting near the gate. A few teachers were probably still inside finishing work. But the loud rush of people leaving school had already passed. I had been playing around behind the home economics building with 2 of my friends. We were not doing anything important. We were just wasting time the way kids do after school. We talked, laughed, wandered around, and avoided going home too early because none of us had anything planned for the evening. The 3 of us lived in roughly the same direction, so we usually walked home together. We did not take the same exact route all the way, but for a while we would leave the school grounds together and walk along the same streets before splitting up. That day, we were heading toward the school gate. The easiest way to get there was to walk straight across the all-purpose field. It was faster than going around the buildings, and because the field was open, we could see the gate from where we were standing. The sun was getting lower, but there was still enough daylight to see clearly. The air felt warm, and there was a little wind moving across the grass. It was one of those ordinary afternoons that gives you no warning. My friends and I were walking and talking about something unimportant. I do not remember what it was. Maybe we were joking about school. Maybe one of us was complaining about homework. Maybe we were talking about a teacher. It does not matter now, because the conversation disappeared from my mind the second I looked up. I do not know why I looked up. Maybe it was because of the flag moving above us. Maybe the wind made a sound against the pole. Maybe something caught the corner of my eye. Or maybe, without realizing it, I had already noticed something strange before I actually looked directly at it. Whatever the reason was, I lifted my head and looked toward the top of the flagpole. That was when I saw him. There was a man sitting on top of it. At first, my mind refused to understand what I was seeing. The flagpole was tall. It was not something a person could casually climb. There was no ladder on it. There was no platform near the top. There was no place where someone should have been able to sit comfortably. The top of the pole was narrow, and from where I stood, the man looked as if he was balanced impossibly high above the field. He was sitting there like it was normal, like he belonged there. He looked elderly. He was small and thin, with a body that seemed slightly hunched even from that distance. His clothes looked old and dirty. They hung loosely from him, almost like they had been worn for years without ever being properly washed. I could not see every detail clearly, but I remember thinking that he looked unlike anyone I had seen around the school before. His skin seemed darker than most people I had seen that day. His face looked weathered and aged, though it was hard to tell because of how far away he was. I remember his posture more than anything. He was sitting on top of that pole with his legs hanging over one side, looking out across the field as if he were watching the school. For a few seconds, I just stared. I remember trying to make sense of it. Maybe there was something attached to the pole that I had never noticed before. Maybe it was part of the flag or a decoration. Maybe it was someone standing on a platform that was hidden from where I was looking. My mind was searching for a normal explanation because the other possibility was too strange. But then, he moved. At first, He was looking straight ahead. Then his head slowly turned. He looked directly at me. The moment our eyes met, something inside me reacted before I even had time to think. I felt cold. Not physically cold, because it was still warm outside. It was a sudden fear that moved through my body. My stomach tightened. My legs felt weak for half a second. I remember knowing with absolute certainty that whatever I was looking at was looking back at me. He did not wave. He did not smile. He did not look confused that a student had noticed him. He just stared. It was not an ordinary stare. It felt focused. It felt intentional. It was like he had been waiting for somebody to look up, and now that I had, he did not want to look away. I immediately started walking faster. At first, I tried not to make it obvious. I told myself not to panic. I told myself that maybe I was seeing something wrong. Maybe there was a normal reason for it. Maybe my friends had not even noticed, and I would look stupid if I suddenly ran. But I could not stop myself from speeding up. My steps became faster. Then I was almost jogging. The school gate was still ahead of us, and I could see the path leading out of the campus. I wanted to get through that gate as quickly as possible. I did not tell my friends what I had seen. I could not even form the words. What was I supposed to say? There is an old man sitting on top of the flagpole. It sounded impossible even inside my own head. So I kept walking, then walking faster, then almost running. I remember getting close to the gate and feeling like I could finally breathe again. Once I was outside the school grounds, I thought maybe whatever I had seen would stop feeling real. Maybe I would turn around and see that it was only a flag caught in the wind, a shadow, or some object I had misunderstood. But then I did exactly what people always do in horror movies. I looked back. I turned around and looked toward the field. The man was still there. And he was still looking at me. Even from that distance, I knew his face was turned toward mine. I knew he had not looked away. The moment I glanced back, our eyes met again. That was enough. I ran. I did not think. I did not tell my friends to run. I did not stop to understand what I had seen. I just ran as fast as I could away from the school. My backpack bounced against my shoulders. My legs felt heavy. I could hear my own breathing becoming loud and uneven. I ran until I was out of breath. By the time I finally slowed down, I was far enough away from the school that I could not see the flagpole anymore. I bent over, trying to catch my breath. My chest hurt, and my heart was beating so hard it felt like it might burst. Then I noticed something strange. My two friends were ahead of me. They had already been running, too. For a moment, I was confused. I had assumed they were behind me or somewhere near me. I had been so focused on getting away that I had not noticed where they were. But they were several steps ahead, also out of breath, also looking back toward the direction of the school. I stared at them. They stared at me. Nobody spoke at first. Then one of them asked, "Did you see that?" I remember feeling a strange mixture of relief and fear. Relief because I was not alone. Fear because that meant it had really happened. I asked what they saw. They both described the same thing. An old man sitting on top of the flagpole, dirty clothes, a strange face, looking down at us. One of them said he had seen the man turn his head toward me. The other said he noticed him just before I started running. Neither of them had said anything because they were too scared. They thought maybe they were the only one who saw him. That was when we realized we had all been frightened at the same time. We had all seen him. We had all reacted without speaking. We had all run from the school. For a while, we stood there talking quickly and nervously, trying to compare what we saw. Every time we described something, the others agreed. We all remembered him being small and old. We all remembered his dirty clothes. We all remembered that he was sitting at the very top of the flagpole, somewhere no person should be able to sit. And we all remembered the way he looked at us, especially at me. I do not know why he seemed to focus on me first. Maybe I was the first one who looked up. Maybe I was the closest to the center of the field. Maybe it was nothing. But I still remember that moment when he turned his head and stared directly at me. It felt personal. After we calmed down enough, we started walking home again. None of us wanted to go back toward the school. None of us wanted to stand near the gate. We kept looking behind us, even though we were far away by then. For the rest of the walk, we kept trying to explain it. Maybe it was a person playing some kind of prank. Maybe he had climbed the pole somehow. Maybe there was a structure near the top that we could not see. Maybe he was a worker or a homeless man who had somehow gotten up there. But none of those explanations made sense. The flagpole was too high. There was nowhere to sit. And even if someone had climbed it, why would he be there after school, quietly watching children leave? Why would he stay so still? Why would he stare at us instead of climbing down when he was noticed? We did not tell many people about it right away. Part of the reason was that we were scared nobody would believe us. The other reason was that saying it out loud made it feel more real. We were young, and we did not know how adults would react. We thought they might laugh at us or tell us we were making it up. Eventually, I told someone at home. The response was exactly what I expected. They told me I was probably tired. They said I might have seen something in the distance and misunderstood it. They asked if my friends had been joking around with me. I said no. I explained that we all saw the same thing. I explained that it was not just me. I said we all ran away because we were scared. But nobody seemed to take it seriously. Maybe they thought 3 middle school kids had allowed each other to become frightened by something ordinary. Maybe they thought it was a story that grew bigger after we talked about it. Maybe they assumed it was a prank. But I knew what I saw. My friends knew what they saw too. And none of us ever saw that man again. That was the first and last time. After that day, I walked across that field many more times. Sometimes alone, sometimes with friends, sometimes when the sun was bright and the school grounds were full of people. The flagpole was always there in the middle of the field, tall and silent. It looked completely normal during the day. But I could never look at it the same way again. Every time I passed it, I would feel my eyes drifting toward the top. I would look quickly, almost without meaning to. I always expected to see him sitting there again. Sometimes, after school, when the field was empty and the sky was getting darker, I would avoid walking directly through the middle. I would take the longer route around the edge. I would stay close to other students. I would walk faster than usual. I never saw him again. But the memory stayed. Over time, I heard different ideas from people about what he might have been. In my country, many people are superstitious. It is normal for people to believe that certain places have spirits, guardians, or things that watch over them. Schools, old buildings, forests, roads, and temples can all collect stories over the years. Some people said that figures like that could be guardians. They said maybe he was not there to hurt anyone. Maybe he was watching the students leave the school safely. Maybe he was some kind of spirit connected to the land or the school grounds. Maybe he had been there for a long time, long before any of us started attending that school. I do not know whether I believe that. Part of me wants to believe he was some kind of guardian. It would be easier to think that he was there to protect us, not to scare us. It would be easier to think that his stare meant he was making sure we got home safely. But another part of me remembers how afraid I felt. A guardian should not look at a child in a way that makes them run until they cannot breathe. A guardian should not sit high above an empty field where no human being could possibly be. A guardian should not turn its head so slowly and lock eyes with you as if it has been waiting for you to notice it. Maybe he was harmless. Maybe he was watching. Maybe he was something that belonged to the school. Or maybe he was simply something we were never supposed to see. All I know is that three of us saw him at the same time. Three of us saw an elderly man in dirty clothes sitting on top of a flagpole at the center of an empty school field. Three of us were too afraid to speak, and three of us ran away from the school without looking back again. Except I did look back once, and he was still staring at me. Sorry to pause for just a moment. If this is your first time here, welcome. I hope you're enjoying the calm so far. If you'd like more nights like this, true stories, gentle rain, no interruptions, please subscribe to Lacuna Noir. It really helps me keep creating these peaceful experiences for you. And tap the bell so you're here every time a new story arrives in the dark. Now, back to the story. Here is the rewritten version, with both stories kept separate in flow. Without headings or divider lines, I lived about an hour away from most of my friends, so I got used to driving back and forth more often than I probably should have. It was not a simple highway drive where you could set cruise control, relax, and let the road carry you home. Most of the route went through the mountains. There were winding roads, sharp turns, long stretches with no houses, cliffs along one side, and tunnels that seemed to swallow the headlights for a few seconds before opening back into darkness. During the day, the drive could actually be beautiful. You could see the trees stretching over the hills, the distant mountains, and the valleys below. But at night, it felt completely different. The roads became narrower somehow. The trees became black shapes against the sky. The cliffs beside the road disappeared into darkness, and the only thing you could see was whatever your headlights happened to catch. I had driven that route so many times that it felt familiar to me. I knew where the sharper turns were. I knew where the tunnels started. I knew which stretches had no place to pull over safely. I knew the few rest stops along the way, and I knew how long it would take to reach each one. A lot of my friends lived near each other, closer to where we usually met up. I was the one who always had the longer drive home. We would spend evenings playing tabletop RPGs, sitting around someone's kitchen table or living room for hours. We would talk, laugh, argue about rules, eat too much junk food, and stay later than we planned. More than once, someone would offer to let me crash on their couch or spare bed. Sometimes I took them up on it. But usually, especially when I had work the next morning, I would decide to drive home. I was young, stubborn, and convinced I could handle it. Normally, staying awake was not much of a problem for me. I had a system. I would turn the music up loud enough that I could feel the bass through the car seat. I would roll the windows down, even if the night air was cold. I would sing along badly and loudly to whatever was playing. Sometimes I would talk to myself, make jokes out loud, or narrate the drive just to keep my brain active. It was not smart, but it worked often enough that I trusted it. I would drive through the mountains with the music turned up, cold air rushing through the car, and my voice wrecked from singing along. By the time I reached home, I would usually still be awake enough to park, drag myself inside, and collapse into bed for a few hours before work. That night was not like that. I had spent the evening with friends, playing as usual. Nothing bad had happened. I had not drunk anything. I had not done anything that should have made the drive more dangerous than normal. I was tired, but I had been tired before. I had work in the morning, and I remember telling myself that I would just get home, sleep for a few hours, and deal with the next day when it came. At some point, I got in my car and started the drive back. The beginning of the route was normal. I remember leaving my friend's place. I remember pulling onto the main road. I remember the first few turns through the dark streets before the real mountain roads began. My music was on. The windows were down. The cold air was hitting my face. I was singing along to something, probably badly, like always. For the first 20 minutes or so, nothing seemed unusual. Then I started feeling tired. Not normal tired. Not the kind where you yawn once or twice and feel better after turning up the music. This was heavier. It felt like my body was trying to shut down, even though my mind was telling it not to. My eyes started feeling dry. The road ahead began to blur at the edges. I would focus on the white lines for a few seconds, then suddenly realize I had been staring too hard. I turned the music louder. I rolled the windows down farther. I sang louder. I slapped my own leg once or twice and told myself to wake up. But it did not help. The tiredness kept coming back stronger. I knew I should not be driving like that. Even at that age, I understood how dangerous it was. The road I was on was not forgiving. There were no wide shoulders. There were no easy places to stop. One side of the road dropped off toward the dark mountainside. The other side pressed close to rock walls and trees. The turns came quickly, and sometimes there were long sections where you could not see around the bend until you were already in it. I remember thinking that I just needed to make it to the next rest stop. There was one ahead, maybe 20 minutes away. It was not much, just a small place with a few parking spaces, a restroom, and enough room to pull off safely. I thought I could park there, sleep for a little while, then finish the drive when I was more awake. That was the plan. I told myself I could make it 20 more minutes. I kept driving. I remember gripping the steering wheel tighter than usual. I remember trying to focus on the road signs as they passed. I remember looking at the dark trees on both sides of the road and feeling like they were leaning closer as I drove through the mountain curves. The music was still playing. I was still trying to sing. I remember one particular song coming on. I remember knowing the words. I remember singing along to it, trying to stay awake through the chorus. I remember thinking that I was not going to make it all the way home without stopping. I still had about 35 minutes left in the drive. I knew I was tired enough that something could go wrong. I remember thinking I just need to make it to the rest stop. That is the last thing I clearly remember. The last solid memory I have is singing along to that song while driving through the dark mountain road, maybe a minute or two after I had admitted to myself that I could not safely make it home without sleep. Then there's nothing. No memory of reaching the rest stop. No memory of pulling over. No memory of driving through the next set of turns. No memory of going through the tunnels. No memory of getting off the mountain road. No memory of entering my town. No memory of turning onto my street. No memory of parking. Nothing. The next thing I remember is waking up 6 hours later in my car. I was in my parking lot at home. For a second, I did not understand where I was. I woke up suddenly, like someone had shaken me hard. My body jerked awake, and my eyes opened wide. It was morning by then. The sky was light. Cars were parked around me. I could hear the normal sounds of people starting their day somewhere nearby. I sat there, completely confused. My car was parked in my usual spot. The engine was off. The keys were still with me. Everything looked normal. But I had no memory of getting there. The confusion lasted only a second before it turned into full panic. I jumped out of the car so fast that I nearly hit the door. I looked around the parking lot, then looked back inside the car. I checked the front of the car first. I checked the bumper, the headlights, and the hood. Then I checked the sides. I looked at the mirrors. I looked at the wheels. I looked for scratches, dents, dirt, broken pieces, anything that might show I had hit something or gone off the road. There was nothing obvious. The car looked normal. I kept looking anyway. I opened the doors. I checked inside. I looked at the passenger seat, the back seat, the floor, and the console. I tried to find some clue that would explain what happened. There was nothing. No memory. No damage. No reason I should have made it home safely. I stood there in the parking lot, trying to force my brain to remember. Did I stop at the rest area? Did I sleep there and then drive home later? Did I somehow wake up and drive the rest of the route without remembering it? Did I pull over somewhere else? Did I black out? Did I drive for 35 minutes through mountain roads with no real awareness of what I was doing? The thought made my stomach turn. I had heard about people driving while half asleep. I had heard about highway hypnosis. I knew people could travel a familiar route and barely remember parts of it later. But this was not just forgetting a few miles of road. I had lost hours. 6 hours had passed. I had gone from being 20 minutes into a dangerous mountain drive, too tired to stay awake, to sitting safely in my parking lot at home the next morning. I tried to reconstruct the night from what I knew. I had left my friend's place. I had driven around 20 minutes into the mountain route. I had become dangerously tired. I had decided I needed to reach a rest stop. Then, I remembered singing a song. Then, I woke up at home. That was all. I thought about whether I might have pulled into the rest stop, fallen asleep in my car, and then driven home after waking up. That would explain the missing hours, at least partly. But I had no memory of parking there, no memory of waking up there, no memory of starting the car again. I had no memory of any of it. The idea that bothered me the most was that maybe I had driven all the way home while sleeping. That should not have been possible. The mountain roads had sharp turns. There were cliffs. There were tunnels. There were places where one mistake could have put me into a rock wall or off the side of the road. I should not have been able to drive through all of that while barely conscious. But somehow, I had. Or maybe I had not. That was the part that stayed with me. I do not know what happened during those missing hours. I do not know whether I pulled over at the rest stop and slept. I do not know whether I drove home in some automatic state without truly being awake. I do not know whether I stopped somewhere else. I do not know how I got into my own parking lot and turned off the car. All I know is that I had been tired enough to know I should not keep driving. Then, I lost time. And 6 hours later, I woke up at home. That drive has never felt completely normal to me since then. I still remember the cold air coming through the windows. I still remember the music turned up loud. I still remember trying to sing to keep myself awake. And I still remember the exact moment I realized I was not going to make it home without stopping. After that, there is only darkness. The second incident happened on that same drive, on the same mountain route that I had used so many times before. This time, I was not tired. It was around 2 in the morning, and I was maybe 15 minutes from home. The difficult part of the drive was mostly behind me. I was awake, alert, and close enough to home that I was thinking about my bed, not worrying about the road. The only problem was that I really needed to use the bathroom. There was a rest stop coming up, one of the small places I knew well from that route. It had a few parking spaces, a bathroom building, and enough light that it usually felt safer than stopping on the side of the road. It was nothing fancy, but it was useful. When I saw the sign for it, I pulled in. The parking lot was quiet. There were no other cars that I noticed when I entered. The place was mostly dark except for a few lights near the bathroom. I parked quickly, got out of the car, and headed straight for the building. I was in a hurry, so I did not take in much around me at first. But as I ran toward the bathroom, I noticed someone standing near one of the lights. He was leaning against a lamppost. He looked like a man in his 30s or 40s, maybe younger, maybe older. He was clean-shaven, with jet black hair that looked neat and carefully styled. He wore a white shirt, a tie, and dark pants. He looked far too clean and formal to be standing alone at a rest stop in the mountains at 2 in the morning. He was smoking a cigarette. The light above him made him stand out clearly against the darkness around the rest stop. He had one shoulder against the pole, one hand near his mouth, and smoke drifting upward into the night. I remember thinking that he looked out of place. Not dangerous exactly, just wrong. A man dressed like that in a city would not have stood out. Near an office building, a train station, or a restaurant, he would have looked completely normal. But at a nearly empty rest stop in the middle of the night, beside a dark mountain road, he looked strange. He watched me run past. He did not say anything. He did not move. He just looked at me. I was too focused on getting to the bathroom to care much. I remember seeing him from the corner of my eye, noticing the white shirt and tie, then pushing through the bathroom door. I was not inside long. I never took long at rest stops, especially that late at night. The bathroom was empty and quiet. The fluorescent lights inside made everything look pale and dirty. I washed my hands, checked the door on the way out, and stepped back into the night. The parking lot looked different. At first, I noticed there were still no other cars. I had assumed the man must have arrived in one. Maybe he had pulled in just before me. Maybe his car was parked behind the building or farther away where I had not noticed it. But there was nothing. No car near the lamppost. No car in the parking spaces. No car on the far side of the lot. Just my car. I stood outside the bathroom for a moment and looked around. The man was gone, too. That was not the part that frightened me at first. People can walk away. He could have gone behind the building, into the woods, or down another path. It was strange, but not impossible. What scared me was the place where he had been standing. I walked far enough from the bathroom to get a clear look at it. There was no lamppost there. There was no light. There was nothing. The place where I had seen him leaning was just an empty patch of pavement beside the edge of the lot. Beyond it was darkness and trees. There was no pole, no broken light, no lamp base, no sign that anything had ever stood there. I stopped walking. For a few seconds, I thought I must have been confused about where he was standing. Maybe he had been closer to the bathroom building. Maybe I had mistaken a signpost for a lamppost. Maybe there was another light farther down the lot, and I was looking in the wrong direction. So I turned slowly and studied the area. I looked at the building. I looked at the parking spaces. I looked at the entrance. I looked toward the road. There were lights in a few places, but none of them were where I remembered him standing. None of them had a pole beneath them like the one he had leaned against. None of them created the exact bright circle of light I remembered seeing around him. I walked a little farther, trying to find the right angle. Still nothing. I remember scratching my head and feeling stupid. I told myself I had probably just gotten mixed up. It was late. I had been in a hurry. Maybe the man had been standing under a light closer to the building, and my brain had placed him somewhere else. That explanation did not feel right, but I wanted it to be right. So I shrugged, turned toward my car, and started walking. Then, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. It was sudden. 1 second I was walking normally, still trying to convince myself I had made a mistake. The next second, I had the overwhelming feeling that someone was behind me, not just nearby, watching me. The feeling was so strong that I stopped. I did not turn around immediately. I do not know why. Maybe I was scared of what I would see. Maybe some part of me already knew I did not want to look. The rest stop had become completely silent. There were no cars passing on the highway close enough to hear. There were no voices, no doors closing, no birds. no wind strong enough to move the trees. I could hear my own breathing. I could hear the small sound of my shoes against the pavement. And I could feel that someone was staring at my back. The feeling got stronger. Every instinct I had told me to get into my car. I did not walk anymore. I ran. I sprinted across the parking lot, yanked open my car door, threw myself into the driver's seat, and locked the doors immediately. I did not even take time to settle down. I started the car as fast as I could and pulled out of the rest stop. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel. I drove quickly toward the highway entrance, checking my mirrors even though I did not want to. Part of me expected to see someone running after my car. Part of me expected to see nothing and feel foolish for panicking. I turned onto the highway. Then I looked over my shoulder, and there he was. He was standing under a lamppost. The exact same man. Clean-shaven, white shirt, tie, jet black hair, cigarette in his hand. He was standing in the exact place I had just been staring at, the place where there had been no light, no pole, and no person only moments before. This time, there was a lamppost. This time, there was light. And he was standing beneath it, watching me drive away. He did not wave. He did not move. He did not chase the car. He just stood there under that light, staring. I kept driving. I did not pull over again. I did not turn around. I did not slow down until I was much farther away from the rest stop. For the rest of the drive home, I kept checking my mirrors. Every time headlights appeared behind me, my stomach tightened. Every time I passed a roadside light, I expected to see him standing beneath it, but I did not see him again. I reached home safely that night, but the image never left me. The thing that still bothers me is not just that I saw a strange man at a rest stop. It is that I saw him under a lamppost that did not exist. I saw the light around him. I saw him leaning against the pole. I saw the cigarette in his hand. I saw him watch me run past. Then, after I came out of the bathroom, there was nothing there. No car, no man, no lamppost, no light. And when I finally drove away, he was back in the exact same place, standing beneath the light that should not have been there. I do not know who he was. I do not know whether he was real, whether I was confused, or whether the late hour and the isolated rest stop made my mind see something that was not there. But I know how it felt. I know the way the back of my neck burned when I felt watched. I know the fear that hit me before I even turned around. And I know that when I looked over my shoulder from the highway, there was a man in a white shirt and tie standing under a lamppost, staring at me from a place that had been empty only moments before. When I was about 10 years old, I was staying at my dad's house for the weekend. It was a normal thing for me at the time. I would go over there, spend a couple of days with him and my brother, watch movies, play games, eat too much junk food, and then go back home after the weekend was over. My dad's house was in a quieter area than where I usually lived. There were fewer houses around, more open space, and woods behind the property. The trees started not too far from the backyard and continued farther than I could see. During the daytime, the woods did not bother me that much. They just looked like normal woods. There were tall trees, thick bushes, fallen branches, and patches where the sunlight barely reached the ground. But at night, they looked completely different. The trees became one giant dark wall outside the house. You could not see very far into them once the sun went down. Even if there was moonlight, it only lit up the edges of the branches and the top of the bushes. Everything deeper in the woods became black. The kitchen window at my dad's house faced that direction. You could stand near the kitchen table and look straight out into the backyard and the trees beyond it. There was a little bit of open yard first, then a stretch of grass and bushes, and after that, the woods began. The house had outdoor lights, but they did not reach far enough to light up the trees. At most, they showed the first few feet near the edge of the yard. One evening, my brother and I were sitting in the kitchen together. I do not remember exactly what we had been doing before that. We may have been waiting for food, watching something in another room, or just sitting around because we were bored. But I remember that the house was quiet. My dad was somewhere else in the house. Maybe he was in the living room. Maybe he was upstairs. I cannot remember. What I do remember is that my brother and I were both near the kitchen window, looking out at the woods. It was already dark outside. Not late enough that everyone had gone to bed, but late enough that the backyard was hard to see. The kitchen light behind us reflected faintly in the window, so at first it was difficult to look past our own reflection. But if you focused, you could still see the darker outline of the trees. We were not looking for anything. We were just staring outside because there was nothing else to do. Then I saw two small red dots deep in the woods. At first, I thought they were some kind of reflection. Maybe they were lights from a car somewhere far away. Maybe they were reflections from the kitchen, or the glow from something inside the house bouncing against the glass. But they did not look like reflections. They were too far apart. They were too steady, and they were in the middle of the trees. I leaned closer to the window. The dots were deep in the woods, farther back than the first row of trees. They were not bright like a flashlight or a porch light. They were dimmer than that, but very clear against the darkness. They had a reddish color, almost like two small pieces of coal glowing in a fireplace. For a few seconds, I just stared at them. I remember feeling confused more than scared at first. I was trying to understand what I was seeing. I thought maybe it was an animal. Animals' eyes can reflect light at night. I had seen that before in movies and on television. Sometimes a cat or deer could look like it had glowing eyes if light hit them in the right way. So I called my brother over. I told him there was something outside. He turned around and looked through the window. At first, he did not see it. Then I pointed toward the spot in the trees, and he went quiet. He saw them, too. The two red dots were still there. We both stood at the window, staring into the darkness. For a while, nothing happened. The dots did not blink. They did not move side to side. They just sat there between the trees. I remember asking my brother if he thought it was an animal. He said, maybe. Neither of us knew what else it could be. We were kids, and the most normal answer was that it had to be some kind of animal looking toward the house. But the more we watched, the stranger it became. The dots began moving, very slowly. At first, I thought I might be imagining it. The woods were dark, and it was hard to judge distance. But after a minute, it was obvious that the red dots were coming closer. They were moving in the direction of the house, not quickly, not running, not even walking fast, just slowly moving forward through the trees. My brother and I stopped talking. We watched the dots come closer, step by step. There was no sound that we could hear, no branches snapping, no leaves crunching, no animal noise, nothing. The backyard outside the window was completely quiet. The dots just kept coming. At first, we still told ourselves it was probably an animal. Maybe it was a deer. Maybe it was a large dog. Maybe it was some kind of wild animal that had wandered near the house. But then one of us noticed something that made both of us feel uneasy. The dots were not close to the ground. They were too high. They were at least adult head height, maybe even higher than that. I remember my brother and I looking at each other. We did not say much, but we both understood the same thing. If those were an animal's eyes, then whatever animal they belonged to would have to be very tall. Too tall. A deer might have eyes high off the ground, but the spacing and movement did not look right. A deer's eyes would have been farther apart in a different way. And if it was a bear, that would have been terrifying, but the shape did not make sense either. There was no visible body yet, only the red dots. But they were moving at the height where a grown person's eyes would be. That was when we started getting scared. We did not want to keep standing in front of the window. We had both seen enough horror movies, even at that age, to understand the stupid feeling of standing there while something outside watched you through the glass. I remember one of us saying something like, "If they can't see us, we can't see them." It was a childish idea, but it made sense to us at the time. We thought that if we turned away from the window, then whatever was out there might not know we were watching it. Maybe it would leave. Maybe it would stop coming closer. Maybe we would stop being part of whatever was happening. So we turned around. We moved away from the window and tried to act normal. I do not remember what we did for those next few minutes. We may have sat down at the table. We may have looked toward the rest of the kitchen. I remember both of us trying not to look back, but also being unable to think about anything else. The whole time I could feel the window behind me. I could feel the woods outside. I kept imagining those two red dots getting closer and closer while we stood there, pretending nothing was wrong. A couple of minutes passed. Maybe it was less than that. Maybe it was more. Time felt strange because I was scared. Eventually, I could not stop myself. I turned back toward the window. The red eyes were much closer. They were at the edge of the trees now. The thing had moved through the woods and reached the bushes near the backyard. It was no longer deep between the trees. It was close enough that I could make out more than just the two glowing dots. I froze. The eyes were in the dark bushes near the tree line, maybe 60 feet from the house. They were still red. They were still too high off the ground. But now there was a shape around them. At first, it was only a silhouette. Something tall was standing in the shadow of the trees. It was thin, but not small. It looked taller than a normal person. Or maybe it only seemed taller because of the darkness and the way it stood. The shape was mostly black, but I could see enough to know it was not a deer, not a dog, and not something that belonged in the yard. I tapped my brother hard on the arm. I did not even say anything at first. I just pointed. He looked. Then he went still. We both stared through the kitchen window. The thing was standing in the bushes. It looked like a tall man, but its head did not look human. I still do not know how to explain what I saw without sounding ridiculous. It had the body shape of a person, or at least something standing upright like one. It had shoulders. It had a chest. It had arms hanging down at its sides. But the head looked like a goat's head. Not like someone wearing a goat mask. Not like a costume. It looked like an actual animal head attached to a tall, human-shaped body. The face seemed long and narrow. The top of the head had a shape that could have been horns, although I cannot swear that I saw them clearly. The darkness hid most details. But the outline of the head was wrong. It was not round like a human head. It had the longer shape of an animal's face, and the eyes were glowing red, not reflecting a little bit of light. Glowing, they were fixed on the house, fixed on us. I felt terrified in a way I had never felt before. I was only 10, and I did not know what to do. I remember feeling like my body had stopped working. I could not look away, but I also could not keep looking at it. The thing stood there in the bushes without moving. It did not run. It did not turn away. It did not make any sound. It just watched. The closer I looked, the more I became convinced that it was looking directly through the kitchen window at us. I do not know whether it could really see us. There was light inside the kitchen, so probably yes. We were standing in front of a bright window, staring out into darkness. If anything was outside, it would have been able to see us much more easily than we could see it. That thought made everything worse. My brother did not say much either. I think he was scared too. We were both just standing there, looking at this tall shape at the edge of the woods. I remember feeling like it was waiting for something, waiting for us to go outside, waiting for someone to open the door, waiting for the lights in the house to turn off, or maybe waiting for us to look away. I did not want to find out. I backed away from the window. Then I turned and ran. I did not tell anyone right away. I just went to my room and hid under the covers. I remember getting into bed even though I was not ready to sleep. I pulled the blanket over my head because that was the only thing I could think to do. I was scared the thing would come closer. I was scared it would come to the back door. I was scared it would stand outside my bedroom window. I was scared that if I looked outside again, I would see those red eyes closer than before. I stayed in bed for a long time. I do not remember if my dad came in and asked what was wrong. I do not remember if my brother told him anything. I only remember feeling too scared to explain it properly. I knew that if I told an adult, they would probably say it was an animal. And maybe that was true. Maybe there was a deer in the woods. Maybe there was a person standing near the trees. Maybe the darkness and fear made us imagine the goat head. But that is not how it felt. It felt too clear. The eyes were too bright. The shape was too tall. And my brother had seen it too. For the rest of that weekend, I did not like looking out the kitchen window after dark. Every time I walked through the kitchen, I would glance toward the woods and then immediately look away. I could not help it. I kept expecting to see those red dots again. Sometimes, when the kitchen lights were on and the yard outside was dark, I thought I could see movement near the trees. I would stare hard, trying to decide whether it was real or just branches moving in the wind. But I never saw the goat-headed figure again. At least not clearly. A couple of weeks later, I asked my brother about it. I had been thinking about it constantly. I wanted to know whether he remembered the same details. I wanted someone else to say that it had happened. I wanted to know that I had not made it up alone. So I asked him whether he had seen the goat man again. He brushed me off. He said we had been tired. He said we were kids and were making things up. He said it was probably nothing. His answer made me angry and confused. I reminded him that he had seen the red eyes first. I reminded him that he had stood at the window with me. I reminded him that he had looked at the same shape in the bushes and gotten scared too. But he would not talk about it. Maybe he really decided it was nothing. Maybe he was embarrassed. Maybe he did not want to remember it. Or maybe he was scared and did not want to admit it. I do not know. But I know what I saw. I remember sitting in that kitchen with my brother, watching two red dots move slowly through the woods toward the house. I remember realizing they were too high off the ground. I remember turning away because we thought that if we could not see them, they could not see us. And I remember looking back a few minutes later and seeing that thing standing at the edge of the trees. Tall, still, human-shaped, with a goat-like head and glowing red eyes. Maybe there is a normal explanation. Maybe it was an animal, a person, or a trick of the darkness. But no explanation has ever fully satisfied me. Because I was not alone. My brother was right there beside me. He saw the eyes. He saw the figure. And for a few minutes that night, we both knew there was something in the woods watching the house. "2 years ago, I moved out to rural Indiana with some of my best friends. We rented a large apartment above my best friend's dad's garage. It was one of those places that sounded perfect when we first talked about it. There was plenty of room, we were close to people we trusted, the rent was manageable, and we were far enough from town that nobody was going to complain if we stayed up late, played music, or sat outside at night. The property itself was old and strange-looking, even before I knew any of its history. It was surrounded by open land and woods. The garage sat beside the main house, and our apartment was built above it. Behind the buildings was a huge yard that eventually gave way to forest. During the day, it was peaceful. You could hear birds, see the trees moving in the wind, and look out across the open space without seeing another house for a long distance. At night, though, the whole place felt different. The darkness out there was heavy. There were no streetlights close by, no nearby traffic, and no city glow in the sky. Once the sun went down, the tree line behind the house became a solid black wall. The backyard looked much larger at night because you could not see where the grass ended and the woods began. You could only see whatever the moon happened to touch. Most of my family was from that area, so they knew the property and the house long before I ever moved there. As soon as they heard where I would be living, almost all of them had the same reaction. They told me the place was haunted. At first, I did not take it seriously. Rural areas are full of stories. Every old house has a rumor attached to it. Every stretch of woods has some local legend. Someone always knows somebody who saw something, heard something, or had a strange experience near an old building. But the stories about that house were more specific than usual. Before my best friend's dad moved there, the building had been a church. One side had been the chapel where people gathered for services. The other wing had been used as living quarters. It was not just an old church building that had been converted into a home. According to my family, weird things had happened there for years. My mom had known about it since she was young. She told me that multiple exorcisms had supposedly taken place there. I did not know how much of that was true, and I still do not. But she spoke about it like it was something people in the area had heard about for a long time. She said she had once been there during one of those exorcisms, or at least nearby while one was happening. According to her, the double doors leading into the living quarters suddenly flew open by themselves. Then something came down the stairs. She said she could hear the heavy stomping of footsteps, like someone large was walking down hard enough to shake the floor. But nobody came out. Nobody appeared at the bottom of the stairs. There was only the sound. I remember laughing a little when she first told me that story. I thought she was trying to scare me because I was moving in there, but she did not laugh with me. She looked serious. She said she had no reason to make it up. That was when I started paying more attention to the building. The apartment itself was fine. It was old, but nothing about it seemed dangerous. The rooms were normal, the kitchen worked, and we had enough space to live comfortably. But the property had parts that felt unfinished or forgotten. One day, not long after I moved in, the other friend who was living with us showed me the basement. It was beneath part of the old structure, below the garage and near the older section of the building. It was made of bare concrete. The air was colder down there than it should have been, and it smelled like damp cement, dirt, and old wood. There were no finished walls, no furniture, and no reason to spend time down there. We were just exploring because we were young, bored, and curious. The basement had a few storage areas and some exposed pipes, but at the far end, there was a small room that did not seem to have any purpose. It was larger than a closet, but smaller than a normal bedroom. There was no furniture in it. No shelves, no boxes, no tools. Nothing. The only thing in that room was a symbol painted in the middle of one wall. It was old-looking, dark, and faded in places, like it had been there for a long time. I cannot remember the exact shape now, but I remember the feeling it gave both of us. We stood in the doorway looking at it and immediately felt uncomfortable. It was not because we knew what it meant. At first, we had no idea, but something about it looked deliberate. It did not look like random graffiti or a child's drawing. It looked like someone had painted it carefully for a reason. It was placed directly in the center of the wall where it was impossible to ignore. We took a picture and looked it up online. The search results were not helpful in a comforting way. We found references claiming it was associated with some kind of demon or dark spiritual figure. The exact details are blurry now, but I remember reading something about it being connected to harming or taking children's souls. It might have been nonsense from random websites. It might have been people connecting an old symbol to scary stories, because that was what people do online. But after reading it, neither of us wanted to stay in that basement. We left the room alone after that. Still, even with all the stories and the symbol in the basement, I did not walk around the property expecting something supernatural to happen. I had lived there long enough to get used to the woods, the darkness, the silence, and the strange history. The place felt eerie sometimes, but that did not mean it was dangerous. Then, one night, something happened that I still cannot explain. It was around 1 in the morning. Everyone else in the apartment was asleep. I had gotten home from work, eaten something, and spent a little time trying to unwind. I was tired, but not ready to sleep. I had one of those restless nights where you feel like your body is exhausted, but your brain is still moving too fast. So I decided to go outside. I wanted to smoke a little, look at the moon, listen to Radiohead, and calm down after work. It was something I did fairly often. The backyard was quiet, and being outside at night usually helped me relax. I would walk around the back of the garage toward the woods, find a spot in the open area, put my headphones in, and sit there for a while. Normally, I took our pit bull puppy, Sweetie, with me. Sweetie was still young, but she was incredibly well trained. She did not need a leash when we were out in the yard. She stayed close to whoever was outside with her and listened when called. Even as a puppy, she was protective in her own way. She was not aggressive, but she was alert. There were packs of coyotes around the property sometimes, especially at night, and Sweetie would usually make enough noise or stay close enough that they kept their distance. She loved going outside with me. Usually, the second I headed for the door, she would be right behind me. She would wag her tail, move around my feet, and follow me toward the back of the garage without hesitation. That night, she came with me at first. I opened the door, stepped outside, and started walking along the side of the garage toward the back of the property. The night was clear enough that I could see the moon through breaks in the clouds. The grass had that pale silver look it gets under moonlight. The woods behind the house were dark and still. Sweetie followed for a few steps. Then she stopped. I noticed because I could no longer hear her paws behind me. I turned around and saw her standing near the corner of the garage. She was looking toward the woods. Her tail was down. Her ears were pulled back. She was whining softly. At first, I thought she had seen a coyote. That was not unusual. Coyotes moved through the area often, and Sweetie knew they were there before we did. Usually, she would become alert, stare into the darkness, and stick close to me. But she never refused to move. This time, she would not come any farther. I called her. "Come on, Sweetie," she looked at me, then looked back toward the woods. She whined again. I called her a second time. She did not move. That was when I started feeling uneasy. Sweetie was obedient. She did not ignore me like that. She was not distracted by a smell or trying to chase something. She looked genuinely scared. I walked back toward her and crouched down. She She came closer to me, but kept her body low. I touched her head and realized she was shaking. Not trembling because she was cold. Shaking, I remember thinking that something must be out there. Maybe a bigger coyote than usual. Maybe another animal moving through the woods. Maybe a deer or something she did not recognize. I told myself that was all it was. I took Sweetie back inside the apartment and brought her into my room. I had her sit on the bed. She stayed there, curled up and tense, still shaking a little. That should have been enough to make me stay inside. But I was young, tired, and stupidly confident that there had to be a normal explanation. I told myself Sweetie had probably just smelled a coyote. I did not want to let a nervous puppy ruin the one thing I wanted to do to relax. So I went back outside alone. I walked around the garage again and headed toward the forest. At first, everything seemed normal. The grass was quiet under my shoes. The house behind me was dark except for a few lights. The woods were in front of me, black and silent. I could hear distant insects and the occasional movement of leaves in the wind. I had my headphones with me, but I had not put them on yet. I was only a short distance from the garage when I noticed something moving beside me. Not directly in front of me, not behind me, beside me. It was at the edge of my vision, in my peripheral. I could not see it clearly because I did not turn my head. I only saw a pale shape keeping pace with me. For a few seconds, I tried to ignore it. I told myself it was a trick of the moonlight. Maybe it was my own shadow moving across the grass. Maybe it was a branch or a patch of pale weeds. Maybe I was more tired than I realized. I kept walking, but the shape stayed beside me. It felt like someone was walking right next to me. My brain kept trying to explain it away, but my body knew something was wrong. I could feel my heart beginning to beat harder. I could feel the cold air against my face. I could feel the strange pressure that comes when you are trying not to look at something because you are afraid of what you might see. Then something clicked in my head. A thought hit me, all at once. You did not imagine that. I stopped walking. For a second, I stood completely still. Then I turned my head. What I saw was a white figure about as tall as my waist. It was standing right beside me. It looked small, but it did not look like a child. The shape was too strange. It was wearing something that looked like a dress, pale and hanging loosely around its body. The figure itself was white or gray in the moonlight, but not in a normal way. It did not reflect the light the way a person should have. I could not make out a face. I could only see the outline of the dress and the small, pale shape of its body. For 1 second, I stared at it. Then something whispered directly into my ear. I still do not know what it said. Maybe it was not a word. Maybe it was only a breathy sound. Maybe the fear made it impossible for me to understand. But it was close enough that I felt the whisper against the side of my face. I ran. I did not stop to look again. I did not try to see where the figure went. I did not try to find a rational explanation. I turned and sprinted into the open backyard area where I normally sat to smoke. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it. I kept expecting to hear footsteps behind me. I kept expecting to feel something touch my shoulder. But I did not look back. I made it to the open area and stopped only because I had nowhere else to go without heading back toward the apartment. For a few minutes, I just stood there, trying to breathe. Then I lit up, put on Radiohead, and tried to calm myself down. I listened to In Rainbows, probably for the 1000th time in my life. The familiar music helped a little. I sat there in the open yard with the moon above me and the forest behind me, trying to convince myself that I had imagined the entire thing. I told myself Sweetie had probably seen a coyote. I told myself the pale shape beside me had been a trick of the moonlight. I told myself the whisper had been wind in the grass or leaves moving near my ear. I had smoked, so I knew people would not believe me if I told them what happened. I knew exactly how it would sound. I knew people would say I was high and scared myself. But in all my years of smoking, I had never experienced anything like that. I had never hallucinated. I had never seen a figure walking beside me. I had never heard a whisper in my ear from someone who was not there. Still, I wanted to believe I was wrong. I stayed outside for a while longer, trying to let the music settle me down. Eventually, I convinced myself that I had been too tired, too jumpy, and too caught up in the stories about the house. I decided I was done for the night. I wanted to go back inside, shower, and sleep. By then, I had almost forgotten the white figure. Or at least I had pushed it far enough into the back of my mind that I thought I could take the faster route back to the apartment. The fastest way was the same way I had come, across the huge open area, toward the garage, with the forest behind me. I started walking. The yard was quiet. The moonlight gave me enough visibility to see the open ground, but the woods were still a solid, dark mass behind it. I walked slowly at first, listening to the music in my headphones and trying not to let myself become nervous again. Then, I saw something moving in the darkness near the edge of the forest. At first, I thought it was an animal. I stopped walking and watched. The shape was large. It was hard to make out, but I could see movement. Something was running through the dark area where the open field met the trees. It moved quickly, fast enough that my first instinct was to assume it was a deer, a dog, or maybe a coyote. But it did not move like any animal I recognized. I kept watching. I could make out 2 legs. The shape was upright. It was large, much larger than the white figure I had seen earlier. It was tall and broad, almost like a person. But the proportions looked wrong in the darkness. It was not walking. It was sprinting. At first, I watched it with that stupid curiosity people get when they should be running. I wanted to know what it was. I wanted to see it clearly enough to explain it away. Then I realized it was coming toward me, not moving across the field, not running along the tree line, running directly at me. The shape came out farther into the moonlight. I could see that it was tall. I could see that it had the rough outline of a person, but it looked too large, too dark, and too wrong. Its shoulders were broad. Its body was hunched forward as it ran. It moved faster than I thought something that big should be able to move. That was when I stopped trying to understand it. I ran. I turned and sprinted toward the apartment as fast as I could. I could hear something behind me. I do not know whether it was footsteps, grass tearing under something heavy, or my own panic making every sound seem worse. But it sounded like something was following me. I did not turn around. I ran across the yard, around the garage, and toward the door. I was fumbling with my keys, shaking so badly that I thought I would drop them. I got the door open, got inside, and shut it behind me as fast as I could. For a few seconds, I stood there with my back against the door, unable to breathe normally. I listened. I expected scratching. I expected footsteps outside. I expected a shadow to pass beneath the door. Nothing happened. The apartment was quiet. Everyone was asleep. Sweetie was still in my room, curled up on my bed. I did not tell anyone right away. I knew exactly what they would say. They would say I was high. They would say I had let the stories about the property get into my head. They would say I had seen a coyote or deer and panicked. They would say the little white figure was probably moonlight, and the bigger shape was probably an animal running through the yard. Maybe there is a normal explanation. I have tried to believe that. But Sweetie was terrified before I saw anything. She refused to walk toward the woods. She was shaking when I brought her back inside. Then I saw something white walking directly beside me. Then I heard something whisper in my ear. And later, I watched a large, shadowy shape sprint toward me across an open field. My friends have their own stories about that house, too. Some of them have heard things, seen things, or felt uneasy in parts of the property. But when I tell people the last part of my story, that something ran toward me in the moonlight, most of them do not believe it. They believe I saw the white figure because it sounds like a ghost story. They believe Sweetie reacted to something because dogs sense things people do not. But they do not believe the larger thing. They say I was high. They say I was tired. They say the woods can make ordinary animals look terrifying at night. I understand why they say that. But I know what I saw. I had smoked before and never hallucinated. I had been tired before and never seen something walking beside me or sprinting toward me from the woods. I had spent plenty of nights outside around that property, and nothing like that had ever happened. It never happened again afterward either. But that night, something was out there. Something made Sweetie refuse to follow me. Something walked beside me in a pale dress, and something large ran out of the darkness toward me. That happened. I know it did. I grew up in what people would probably call a rough part of town. It was not the kind of neighborhood where parents liked their kids wandering around after dark, especially not alone. There were always stories about things happening nearby. Fights, break-ins, stolen cars, people yelling in the street late at night, police cars showing up with their lights off, and things adults talked about quietly when they thought children were not listening. I do not know if there was an official curfew for kids under 18, or if it was just something people in the neighborhood always said. But as I remember it, nobody our age was supposed to be outside late at night, especially not after midnight. We had been told enough times that if the police saw kids walking around at 1 or 2 in the morning, we would be stopped, questioned, and probably taken home to our parents. At 12 years old, that sounded terrifying. Not because we had done anything truly bad. We were not criminals. We were just kids. But when you are 12, getting caught outside after curfew feels like the end of the world. You imagine the police calling your parents. You imagine being grounded for months. You imagine every adult in your family finding out and never trusting you again. My cousin was staying over at my house that night. She was 13, only 1 year older than me, but at that age, 1 year feels like a lot. She acted braver than I did. She had that slightly older kid confidence where she would dare you to do things and make it sound like you were weak if you said no. We had been awake late, doing what kids do when they are supposed to be asleep. We talked quietly, laughed too loudly, tried not to wake anyone, and kept looking out the window at the empty street. It was one of those nights where staying awake felt exciting simply because we knew we were not supposed to. At some point, we started talking about snacks. There was a 7-Eleven down the road from my house. It was not very far away. In the daytime, walking there was nothing. People went back and forth constantly for candy, soda, chips, cigarettes, lottery tickets, and whatever else they needed. It was one of those places that always had bright lights on, even in the middle of the night. We started joking about going there. At first, it was not serious. We said we could sneak out, get sweets and energy drinks, come back before anyone woke up, and no one would ever know. We imagined how cool it would feel to be out at night by ourselves. We thought it would make us seem older. We thought it would be an adventure. Then, the idea stopped being a joke. It was around 1 in the morning. The house was quiet. Everyone else was asleep. We had no real plan, no phones that could help us much, and no understanding of how dangerous it could be for two young girls to walk through that neighborhood at night. All we could think about was candy, energy drinks, and the thrill of doing something we were not allowed to do. So, we slipped outside. I remember being nervous the second we stepped out of the house. The air was colder than I expected. During the day, the street felt busy enough that it seemed normal. At night, everything looked different. The houses were dark. The street lights were spread far apart, leaving long shadows between them. Some yards had broken fences. Some windows were covered. The road itself was uneven, with potholes and cracked pavement. There were no people walking around, no cars driving past, no voices. At first, that silence made it feel exciting. We walked quickly, whispering and laughing under our breath. Every little sound seemed louder than usual. Our shoes against the sidewalk, a dog barking somewhere far away, wind moving through a tree, a car door closing in the distance. We kept checking behind us even though there was nothing there. The 7-Eleven was bright when we reached it. The lights inside looked almost painfully white after the dark street. We went in trying to act normal, like we were not two kids who had snuck out at 1 in the morning. I remember looking around at the empty store, feeling nervous that the cashier would ask where our parents were. But nobody said anything. We grabbed sweets, energy drinks, and whatever else seemed exciting at the time. I do not remember exactly what we bought, only that it felt like a huge victory. We had done it. We had made it there. We had bought our stuff. We had not been caught. Walking out of the store, we felt brave. For a few minutes, we even felt stupid for being nervous in the first place. Nothing had happened. There were no police waiting outside. No adults had stopped us. No one had asked questions. We started walking home with our drinks and candy, talking about how easy it had been. Then we saw the police car. It was coming down the road toward us. At first, we only saw the headlights. The street was dark, and the road was uneven, so the lights bounced slightly as the vehicle moved. But then, we could see the shape of the car behind them. It looked like a police cruiser, at least from a distance. Our hearts dropped. We both froze for a second. In our 12 and 13-year-old minds, there was only one possible explanation. The police had seen us. They knew we were out past curfew. They were coming to arrest us or drag us home. It sounds ridiculous now, but at the time, we were terrified. We did not think about the fact that police had actual emergencies to deal with. We did not think about the possibility that they were just driving past. We did not think that two kids holding candy and energy drinks were probably not the biggest problem in the neighborhood. We just panicked. "There's a cop," one of us whispered. Then we ran. There was a small field near the road, not far from where we were walking. It was mostly open ground with only 2 or 3 trees scattered across it. The trees were not large enough to hide anyone well, but we were desperate. We ran toward one of them and crouched behind it. I remember pressing myself against the trunk, trying to make my body as small as possible. My cousin was beside me. We were both breathing hard, trying not to make noise. The candy bags crinkled in our hands, and I remember feeling stupidly worried that the sound would give us away. The police car came closer. Because the streets were so bad, the vehicle sounded loud as it moved over the uneven pavement. The tires made a rough sound. The engine seemed louder than it should have been. Every second it got closer, we expected it to turn toward us or stop beside the field. Then it stopped. We both went completely still. For a second, I thought we were caught. I imagined a police officer getting out and shining a flashlight at us. I imagined someone shouting for us to come out. I imagined having to explain why we were hiding behind a tree in a field at 1 in the morning. But nothing happened. There were no voices, no flashlight, no car door. The silence lasted just long enough for us to become confused. Then we slowly peeked around the tree. The vehicle was not a police car. It was a large white van. I do not know how we had mistaken it at first. Maybe it was the headlights. Maybe it was the darkness. Maybe the shape of the van had been hidden by the angle of the road. But when we looked again, there was no police car anywhere. There was only a big white van stopped near the edge of the field. I remember staring at it, trying to understand. The van did not have clear markings that I could see. It was not an ambulance. It was not a delivery van. It was just plain white, large, and sitting there in the dark. That alone would have been creepy. But then my cousin screamed, not loudly enough to wake the whole neighborhood, but loud enough that it cut through the silence. Run. I did not ask why. The fear in her voice was enough. We both took off. We ran as hard as we could across the field and toward the houses on the other side. I remember my legs feeling weak and my lungs burning almost immediately. I remember clutching my bag of candy and then dropping it somewhere without caring. As we ran, I looked behind me. The van was moving. It was following us. At first, I thought maybe it was just turning around. Maybe it was going down the road in the same direction. Maybe we had scared ourselves and were imagining it. But it kept coming. The white van moved along the road beside the field, matching our direction. Its headlights swept across the grass. The light made the open field feel even more exposed. There was nowhere to hide. No cars, no buildings, no other people. Just two kids running in the dark. I remember seeing the van's headlights moving closer and feeling a kind of fear that I had never felt before. This was no longer about getting caught by the police. This was no longer about being in trouble for sneaking out. This felt dangerous. We ran toward a row of backyards. There were fences between the properties, but they were old wooden fences, some higher than others. We did not stop to think. We just climbed. My cousin got over the first fence ahead of me. I remember grabbing the top and trying to pull myself up. My hands slipped once. I scraped my knee against the wood. Then I managed to get over and dropped into the next yard. We ran to the second fence. Behind us, the van had stopped. I heard something that made my entire body go cold. The doors opened. I do not know whether it was the side door, the back doors, or both, but I heard the sound clearly. The heavy sliding or swinging sound of van doors opening in the dark. My cousin heard it too. We did not look back. We climbed the second fence. This one was harder. It was taller, and I remember getting caught for a second on the top. My cousin was already over, whispering for me to hurry. I threw myself down into the next yard and landed badly, but I did not care. We ran deeper into the backyard. There was a shed near the back fence. It was old, dark, and probably full of gardening tools or junk. Normally, I would never have gone near it. But at that moment, it looked like the only place we could hide. We ran to it. The door was not locked. I do not know if that was lucky or terrifying. We pulled it open and squeezed inside. The shed smelled like dirt, old wood, oil, and damp grass. It was almost completely dark inside. There were things stacked against the walls, maybe tools, maybe boxes, maybe lawn equipment. We did not turn on a light. We did not make noise. We just crouched on the floor behind whatever we could find. I could hear both of us breathing. My cousin was crying silently. I was trying not to cry because I was scared that if I started, I would not be able to stop. For the first few minutes, every sound felt like someone coming toward the shed. A car passing somewhere nearby. A dog barking. Branches moving. A door closing in the distance. Every time we heard something, we held our breath. I remember listening for footsteps. I was convinced someone would come into the yard. I kept imagining the van doors opening and someone walking through the grass, checking behind fences, looking through windows, searching the yards. Maybe nobody was searching for us. Maybe the van had nothing to do with us. Maybe we had panicked over nothing. But at 12 years old, hiding in a dark shed after hearing a van stop and its doors open, there was no way to think calmly. We stayed there for what felt like forever. I do not know exactly how long it was. It may have been an hour. It may have been longer. Time felt slow because we were scared. We barely moved. We barely spoke. When we did speak, it was in whispers so quiet that we could barely hear each other. At some point, we started worrying that the people who lived in the house would find us. We imagined an adult opening the shed door, finding two kids hiding inside, and yelling at us. But even that felt safer than going back outside. Eventually, the neighborhood became quiet again. The sounds from the road faded. We did not hear the van anymore. We waited longer anyway. Then, when we finally felt brave enough, we opened the shed door slowly and looked out. The yard was empty. The street beyond the fence was dark. There was no van that we could see. We climbed back out and made our way home as quickly as we could. This time, we stayed close to houses. We avoided the open field. We did not talk much. We were too scared and too tired. When we got back to my house, we slipped inside as quietly as we could. Nobody had noticed we were gone. At least, not then. We went back to the room where we had been staying and sat there for a long time, trying to decide whether we should wake someone up and tell them what happened. But we did not. We were still more afraid of getting in trouble than we were of explaining the truth. We thought our parents would be furious. We thought they would focus on the fact that we had snuck out at 1 a.m. We thought they would ground us, yell at us, and tell us that whatever happened was our own fault for being outside. So we kept quiet. The next day, we tried telling a few friends. Nobody believed us. They thought we were making it up to make our late-night trip sound more exciting. They laughed and said we probably saw a normal van and scared ourselves. Some said maybe the driver had just been turning around or pulling over. Others said there was no way a van would chase two kids over fences. Maybe they were right. Maybe it was just a coincidence. But I still remember the way it felt when we looked around the tree and saw that there was no police car. I remember the big white van sitting there in the dark. I remember my cousin screaming for me to run. I remember looking back and seeing it follow us. And I remember hearing the doors open as we climbed the second fence. A few months later, I heard that someone had been abducted somewhere in the area. I do not know the details. I never looked into it properly. I do not know if it involved a van. I do not know if it happened near the same streets where we were running that night. I do not know whether it was connected to anything we saw. But hearing about it made the memory worse. It made me wonder what would have happened if we had not hidden. It made me wonder if the van really had been following us. It made me think about how close we might have been to something much worse. We moved away not long after that. I never went back to check what happened with the abduction story. I never searched for old articles or asked people in the neighborhood for details. Part of me did not want to know. Part of me was afraid that if I found out more, it would make that night feel even more real. But I still remember it. I remember how brave we thought we were when we left the house. I remember the bright lights of the 7-Eleven. I remember the excitement of buying candy and energy drinks in the middle of the night. And I remember how quickly that excitement turned into terror. At 12 and 13 years old, we thought the worst thing that could happen was getting caught by the police for being out after curfew. We had no idea there were worse things than getting in trouble. That night taught us how quickly a normal street can become dangerous. When the lights are low, nobody is around, and a white van stops after you think it is a police car. Even now, I cannot hear the sound of van doors opening at night without remembering those fences, that dark field, and the way we hid in a stranger's shed until we were too scared to move. Look, if you're still watching, you already know what this channel is. No jump scares, no fake drama, just real stories about real people who survive things most of us can't even imagine. And that's scarier than any movie could ever be. If you want more of this raw, unfiltered truth, told the way it deserves to be told, subscribe to Lacuna Noir. We're not here to waste your time. We're here to tell the stories that actually matter. Thanks for listening. Now go get some sleep, if you can.